Hi, I'm Ryan Mullally. I'm an attorney. I've litigated at every level of the U.S. legal system, up to and including the U.S. Supreme Court. And I am a natural law enthusiast and a long-time advocate for the idea that what is referred to as progressivism is actually an attempt to progress beyond the values that we were founded on, beyond the Declaration of Independence, beyond the values that made our nation great, beyond the things that gave us abolition of slavery, that ended segregation, that ended some of the real horrors in our chapters, that gave us the civil rights movement, the things that Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. appealed to in our moments where we were living up to our promise were the values in the Declaration of Independence. And I have heard that Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas gave remarks at the University of Texas in which he articulated and championed the values this country was founded on and differentiated them meaningfully from the progressive values that have infiltrated our society and have become a form of status quo, such that people don't even understand that the ground they're standing on sometimes is a departure from our inheritance, from the country we were promised. So this is a deeply, deeply exciting moment for me. And we're going to jump into this content right now. I see that some people are dropping comments and supers. I'm delighted to have them. Weld QC John pointing out that with a 10, thank you, buddy, to share in my celebration that the next first 5 welding class students passed their welder certification test. 15 more to go over the next 4 weeks to end this spring semester. Hey, man, thanks for the 10, and thank you for teaching all the people this useful skill. And I honestly, I think that this is an apropos comment beyond the 10, and my thanks for it, John, because one of the things that I think we're going to touch on in Justice Thomas's remarks is that America has a particular philosophy, but is not known for being a place where people are hyper intellectual. It's a philosophy that we imbibe. It's a blue collar philosophy. It's a common sense philosophy. It's an idea that we are entitled to liberty, that we are given liberty by our Creator, that we are entitled to the pursuit of happiness, that these are God-given rights that do not come from the government, that are just intrinsic to who we are. And we don't need to explain it or justify it. We know it in our bones. We know who we are. And this is a sense that has been somewhat lost. And I think, well, QC John's comment and his 10, thank you again, my friend, I think is a great reminder of like what actually matters, right? Like we're supposed to be building a country that works for welders who are passing their certificates. That is not, it doesn't need to be something that is explained to you from on high by an academic for it to make sense. It should be the sort of thing that you feel intrinsically as a matter of common sense, as a matter of human decency, as a matter of being an American. And I'm hyping this video too much. I'm worried it won't live up to my expectations now, but I am beyond excited for this one. So let's jump into the content, and here we go.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to see so many Longhorns and friends here for a very special occasion. I am grateful to be part of today and honored to introduce our speaker. There is so much that a student or a lawyer, frankly, even a citizen, can learn from Justice Clarence Thomas. He has served on our nation's highest court longer than any current justice, and has shaped how we think about the law in ways that will endure for generations. But before I introduce him, I want to invite us to consider something deeper. Because we're not only here to listen to a great jurist, we're here also to learn from someone who has devoted a life to a great experiment. That experiment began 250 years ago, born at our nation's independence, but it's never been self-sustaining. It endures because each generation produces people who seek to understand it, who take it seriously, and who are willing to live it out.
Even the introduction so far has been fire. Like these are values that endure, but they are values that we have to carry forward, right? We have to carry them forward. They endure because we carry them to the next generation. And the concern is that there's been a generation where people have been taught to hate these values, to despise these values, that these values are suspect. And I love that this is happening at a college. I love that University of Texas is taking this position where they're saying that these are values worth preserving. So hyped.
Justice Thomas is, in the fullest sense, a great citizen of this republic. His civic life has many important things to teach us, and many of them remind us of ourselves. The first is this: Justice Thomas has always chosen to go his own way. He once wrote about reading Ralph Ellison's book, Invisible Man, and recognizing in it a man who spent years going in everyone else's way except his own, and resolved that he would not be that way.
One really interesting thing about Justice Thomas, speaking of him being the kind of guy who goes his own way, who makes sure that he's thought about things and is doing things in the way that he thinks is right and good. Justice Thomas, unusually for somebody who champions originalism, limited government, who's opposed to substantive due process, who's opposed to having the federal government tell people how to live, he grew up in the segregated South. So when he was a child, it was full-blown segregation in the South. And yet his sense of the enduring promise of America, of the enduring promise of the Declaration of Independence, of the enduring promise of our shared values was so ingrained that even the fact that our government denied those rights to him specifically did not deter him from holding those values. And really think about that for a second, because there are so many people today who would give up these values for a nickel. They would give up these values because it lets them feel superior to talk down to people who have these values, right? They would give them up for anything. They'd give them up for a fleeting sense of moral superiority. And he wouldn't give them up. And he was actually discriminated against by his government. His autobiography is remarkable.
I set out to do my best to be right. Being right demands more than going along with what's easy or expected, but is often the only way to do things that last. The people of Texas founded this university on a similar conviction. Our state constitution calls us to be a university of the first class. Longhorns understand what it means to lead our own path. The second thing in his life teaches us is that freedom is inseparable from responsibility. That bears repeating. Freedom is inseparable from responsibility. Justice Thomas has spoken throughout his life about the difference between what we are owed and what we owe others, about the fact that a free people cannot sustain their freedom without accepting the obligations that come with it. This is the
Holy God, the introduction is fire. Holy shit, yes. Freedom decoupled from responsibility is nothing but self-destructive hedonism and infinite permissiveness. You have a God-given right to liberty, and a free people must be a moral people to preserve their freedoms. Ordered liberty is the concept that your freedom must be married with your responsibility to yourself, to your community, to those around you, to your country. This doesn't mean that you have infinite responsibility to strangers you've never met. It means that you have a responsibility to make your life better, and by extension, to make the lives of those around you better. Because as you better yourself, as you better your family, as you better your community, as you better your country, you contribute to the common good by contributing to yourself. It's the Jordan Peterson clean your room thing. Holy shit, the introduction is fire. I'm very excited. You can probably tell. Very excited.
Foundation of citizenship. It is why we are here. Whether you're studying law or medicine or physics or humanities, the purpose of your education is not only to develop your own mind, it is also to put your mind in service to others. The president of the Republic of Texas, Mirabel Lamar, who secured the future of this university, set aside public land for public education, has a famous quote you may have heard before. He tells us that the cultivated mind is the guardian genius of democracy. He continues, guided and controlled by virtue, the noblest attribute of man. Justice Thomas lives out that virtue, and he invites us by his example to do the same. Now, I'd like to close with a biographical note about Justice Thomas. He did not attend the University of Texas at Austin. But when I look at his life, the path he chose, the convictions he holds, I see the spirit of a Longhorn. In truth, he reflects what we believe, and importantly, who we hope to become. It is now my great honor to introduce Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, the Honorable Clarence Thomas.
Now, just to level set expectations here, because I'm really psyched, but I do want to level set expectations. Justice Thomas is a brilliant man with insightful commentary, but he is not like the natural charismatic speaker that Justice Scalia is, right? So his delivery is never as sharp and funny and kind of witty and extemporaneous as Justice Scalia. I just want to level set that for you up front, so that you're not disappointed by that down the road. I'm really psyched about this, but I expect that he's going to speak in his style.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think I'll quit while I'm ahead. Thank you all very much. President Davis, Provost Bowden, Dean Dyer, faculty, students, and honored guests. I thank each of you for being here, and I thank the school and the officials here for the invitation to visit the University of Texas at Austin. My wife, Virginia, and I are pleased to be here to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Here to 250 more.
If my memory serves me, this is only my second visit to the University of Texas, and this is the first visit at the invitation of the university. But I have hired and worked with a number of outstanding young people associated with this university. My first was now Chief Judge Greg Maggs of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Services, who was a fairly new faculty member at the law school when I became a member of the court. He took a leave of
Bud Gaff. It was George H.W. Bush appointed Thomas.
absence to help me as a law clerk during the second half of my first term. My first UT graduate to serve as a law clerk was Greg Coleman 3 decades ago. Greg went on to become the first solicitor of the state of Texas. He was simply outstanding, as was his son, Reed, who also was a graduate of the law school here and who was also equally outstanding. Greg's widow and our very dear friend, Stephanie, is with us today. Stephanie, thank you. And thanks for being such a good friend. And both Greg and his son Reed clerked for my dear friend, Judge Edith Jones, also a graduate of UT Law School.
Edith Jones shout out? We got an Edith Jones shout out. In case you don't remember, Judge Edith Jones, was the circuit judge, court judge in the Fifth Circuit, who authored the opinion that I reviewed that said that it is not actually required that the federal government grant bail to people who are here illegally and are caught inside the borders, if they were detained at the border, then they would actually not get bail. But if they were inside the border, then they do get bail, and you get treated better for having evaded the border guards. So this is it was a very based opinion, but also I was very fortunate at a Federalist Society event to have dinner with Judge Jones, and she gave remarks, and the topic that she wanted to speak about was, in fact, the Declaration of Independence and its enduring values for our society, which is what I understand Justice Thomas is going to talk about. So this is a collection of the world's most based legal minds, is I guess what I'm getting at.
I greatly admire Judge Jones. She is one of my heroes, and I admire her as a person and as a jurist. And I'm grateful that she can be here today.
So when I tell you that Judge Jones is unfathomably based and just an incredible person, Justice Clarence Thomas just shouted her out and expressed his gratitude to her for who she is and what she means as a jurist and a legal mind. So that's the level of respect that this woman has and has earned.
A number of my former clerks are also here. I can't tell you which ones. So let me ask them to stand to be recognized. So in my chambers, UT and UT Law School are very well represented. I hope, I'm having a little trouble with this, getting used to the podium, sorry about that. I hope that my talk today will help in some small way to inaugurate another great initiative, the state of Texas's plan to restore the teaching of civics and Western civilization to a central place in its flagship university.
What an incredible, hey Kay, what's going on? What an incredible mission. I was unaware that Texas was doing this. So they've created an initiative to enshrine civics and the values of the Declaration of Independence in their university and their education system. This is exactly what I've been talking about, that the reasonable right needs to focus on. It needs to focus on restoring our sense of pride in who we are and building up our understanding of our federalism, our system, our values, and telling the story with our heads held side, a full chest about who we are as Americans. I didn't know Texas was doing this. That's incredible. Well done, Texas.
And I am grateful and honored to have been invited by Justin Dyer, the Dean of the new School of Civic Leadership. I'm also grateful for the assistance of my former law clerk, Professor John Yu, who has spent the last 3 decades at Berkeley Law School, but is now joining Justin and his team here at the University of Texas.
Ooh, that's a big pickup. John Yoo is a very big legal name. He's a big time originalist. Does not actually side with Trump on birthright citizenship. He went the other way on birthright citizenship. But he's a very famous professor, a big originalist. I believe he was actually a Thomas clerk. And he's a big get. If he's moving from Berkeley to University of Texas, their law school is going to move up in the rankings because he's a big name. So that's going to really improve the reputation of the school.
The school's stated mission is to help students encounter the distinct inheritance of Western civilization and the American constitutional tradition as part of a larger quest for wisdom about how to live and how to lead.
I want to go to this school. The unique American inheritance that you're going to learn about how to live and how to lead by focusing on American values, American civics, American constitutional theory. I mean, what an unbelievable mission statement. I would love to go to this school. Is Berkeley law as leftist as Berkeley is? Yeah, it definitely is. Definitely is, for sure.
Your plans could not come at a more important moment for our nation, when, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the very values announced in it have fallen out of favor. It is my sincere hope that your work to revitalize the teaching and research of Western civilization and the American constitutional tradition will lead the way in the reform of our nation's colleges and universities. And I hope that your example will help to rejuvenate our fellow citizens' commitment to the principles of the Declaration of Independence. I seem to always enjoy my travels to this amazing state. My wife, Virginia, and I have many wonderful friends and acquaintances here. And it is so special to have our dear friends, Harlan and Kathy Crow, join us today. One of the features of this state that stands out in a way that is the way that Texans talk about it. What comes through is a sustained and sustaining affection that they have for their home state. That reverential feeling for and attachment to Texas is to be respected and admired, and if possible, emulated. This affection is similar to the attachment that I grew to have for my home state of Georgia, and certainly for our country, despite the indelible mark of segregation and its companion evils. I was proud to say that I was American by birth and Georgian by the grace of God. It was not uncommon to hear others openly proclaim their allegiance to God and country. At our grammar school, St. Benedict's, we started each school day by lining up 2 by 2 and class by class in the schoolyard to watch the raising of our flag and to say the Pledge of Allegiance before silently marching to our respective classrooms. Even as so much of our God-given and constitutional rights were denied us, we still faithfully said the Pledge of Allegiance, memorized the preamble to the Constitution, and yearned for the fulfillment of its promised ideals.
That is such a powerful image that he just conjured, right? And just like the artfulness of this, where he started with the importance of local allegiance. You know, people in Texas are proud to be Texan. He's proud to be Georgian. He's proud to be Georgian. He's proud to be American. But he grew up in segregation. And if you watch this channel, this comes as no surprise to you. He believes in natural law. He believes that our natural rights are God-given. So he had those rights, even though the government was denying them to him. They were denying his God-given rights. They were infringing upon his rights, but he still had them. He still had that dignity. It's not something that the government could give to him. It's something that they could infringe upon, but they couldn't give it to him because he already had it. And so he had dignity even in segregation, right? Like, it's such a different worldview than we have today, where we're encouraged to think of people in terms of victim and victimizer, oppressed and oppressor narratives. Here's someone who legitimately was oppressed, but doesn't view it that way because he has a framework to place it in that lets him contextualize the experience differently. And as part of a larger story of America living up to its promise, rather than a story about his own oppression, which I'm sure was actually quite pervasive, given that he grew up in the segregated South. I actually feel like we're at a tipping point where these ideas might actually get popular again. We might have a renaissance of American philosophy because they're getting talked about. They're getting agency. And, if this is the time, if this is where there's momentum, now is the time for us to grow. Now is the time to push these ideas. Now is the time to start talking about the Declaration, about natural law, about natural rights, about our rights coming from our creator, not from our government, about the purpose of our government being to secure those rights. This is the time to do it because there's an upswing now, and there hasn't been. People haven't been talking about this stuff for a long time.
Sadly, these sentiments are not as widely shared among our fellow citizens today.
No, they are not.
And they certainly do not seem to have that sustaining strength that they had back then. In fact, all too often, the sentiments tend toward cynicism, rejection, hostility, and animus toward our country and its ideals. With the foregoing in mind, I would like to begin by addressing my first encounter with the principles of the Declaration of Independence. It is perhaps not what you would immediately think. The second paragraph of the Declaration proclaims, We hold
these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. He's speaking my love language right now.
Hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Throughout my youth, these truths were articles of faith that were impervious to bigotry and discrimination. The American Heritage Dictionary of English Language.
They were articles of faith because they had to be, because he lived in an era where his own people were attempting to deny him the full expression of those rights. Whew, that cuts deep.
Defines self-evident as obviously true and requiring no proof, argument, or explanation. Whether they had a divine source or a worldly one, they were never questioned. They were the Holy Grail, the North Star, the rock, immovable and unquestioned.
All right. For those of you who watch the channel regularly, we spent a lot of time trying to unpack whether you need a divine creator to get to natural law or whether you can get there without it. So that's been a major theme on the channel. But he also spent time developing the idea of self-evidence. It's self-evidently true, meaning it doesn't require justification. It doesn't require that you actually give a logical argument to prove it. It is self-evidently true. Where does the concept of self-evidence come from in our founders' language? Where did this idea come from? If you pay attention to the channel, you know the answer. It came from Thomas Reid, who championed Scottish common sense realism. And Scottish common sense realism teaches that there are certain axiomatic human experiences that cannot be reasonably questioned, because to question them opens you up to a regress of defeaters. Your worldview becomes viciously self-defeating. And more importantly, because no actual human could live questioning these things. These are intrinsic to human nature. They are self-evident and do not require justification. This is what our natural rights are. This is what natural law is. This is what our founders said and believed. And this is Justice Thomas explaining in his own words and his own experience why he believes it.
Despite the multiplicity of laws and customs that reeked of bigotry, it was universally believed among those Blacks with whom I lived and who had very little or no formal education that in God's eyes and under our Constitution, we were equal. This was also the case with my nuns, most of whom were Irish immigrants. At home, at school, and at church, we were taught that we are inherently equal, that equality came from God, and that it could not be diminished by man.
He was taught to believe that equality came from God and could not be diminished by man. God, that's a beautiful sentiment. What a beautiful sentiment. Especially in the context of his history and the life he led and the segregation he suffered. The idea that these American ideals were sustaining for him, that they sustained his sense of dignity, his sense of worth, even in an era where the government was trying to infringe upon his rights in this way. I mean, that's truly moving. Truly moving. Yeah. Yeah, Ukele. Yeah, he just sound what a terrible grifter this guy must be. You have to understand that, like, giving these remarks, you can see it already. People are going to circle up. There's going to be vicious attacks on him in the next couple days. There are going to be vicious attacks on Thomas in the next couple days. And you already see them starting because he's calling out the flaw. He's calling out the game. He's saying, these are our values and people are disparaging them. This is who we are. This is the core. And as you guys know, this is not a set of beliefs that is popular on the left. It's not popular on the left. So just doing what he's done already is going to anger them. I can't imagine when he gets warmed up. The generosity continues. Blasterbot. 5 more natural law memberships. The emotes are rolling in. The people have the OTJ and the piss cry and the Thomas and the Scalia at their fingertips. It's a great night. Thank you, Blasterbot, for your generous support. I appreciate you, buddy. Jefferson C. Post with the 2. Opposed to the leftist, equality comes from us. Yes. That is exactly the leftist belief. The classical Declaration of Independent American belief is our rights come from God, not the government. The government is here not to infringe and get out of the way and secure those rights. And the left says your rights come from me, your benevolent leader, benevolent overlord, who will guide you to a better tomorrow. And don't worry, I'm sure I'll take care of those rights. But if I don't, they came from me. So who are you to complain? It's a very different worldview for sure. Very different worldview for sure.
We're made in the image and likeness of God. That proposition was not debatable and was beyond the power of man to alter. Others with power and animus could treat us as unequal, but they lacked the divine power to make us so.
Oh my God. I don't know about you guys. Did that cut deep? Did that cut deep? He said, our rights come from God. Our rights are God given. And though there were people in the government who were seeking to make him less than that, they lacked the power to do so because the rights didn't come from them. And this is Jefferson C. Poe's point. If your rights come from God, then you might be oppressed by your government, but you can never be diminished in your dignity. But if your rights come from the state, you only have the dignity the state gives you. This is deep stuff.
Somehow, without formal education, the older people knew that these God-given or natural rights preceded and transcended government.
Natural rights, natural law. This is core content, baby. This is core channel content. He's speaking the language.
Mental power or authority. When you lived in a segregated world with palpable discrimination, and the governments nearest to you enforced laws and customs that promoted unequal treatment, it was obvious that your rights or your dignity did not come from those governments, but rather from God. Though not a literate man, my grandfather often spoke of our rights and obligations coming from God, not from architects of segregation and discrimination. Men were not angels. They were subject to the constraints of antecedent rights. And we were not subject to those men, even as we were subjected to their whims.
Oh,
We knew that life, liberty, and property were sacrosanct. Those truths were self-evident to the adults in our lives and were taught to us as indelible, undeniable truths. Those around us would endure or could endure the insults of segregation with dignity because they knew that in God's eyes, they were equal. All too often, there is an unfortunate tendency when discussing the Declaration to make these self-evident truths and first principles of government obscure. Intellectuals want you to believe that our founding principles are matters of esoteric philosophy or sophisticated debate. Even those who support them too often talk about them as if they were academic playthings.
I've been thinking about this since the channel started. How do you talk about these things in a non-academic way? Right? Because it's supposed to be self-evident. It's supposed to be in your bones and your blood that you believe that you have these natural rights. This is not armchair philosophy that you're debating between PhDs. This is something that everybody enjoys and understands. And I sometimes worry that in getting into the debate scene and doing the debates about this, it becomes too analytic. And I got some feedback from you guys, like the conversation with Stelios was like too academic. And I think it's actually an important point. Like how do you tell this story to people in a way that resonates without it being a philosophy lesson? I mean, I'm all ears because I've been thinking about this for months.
They overcomplicate them, take the spirit out of them, and discuss them in a way that puts us to sleep. But the principles of the Declaration of Independence, as I encountered them, are a way of life. They are not an abstract theory that you only learn in college or law school, but the basic premises of our Constitution and government that you can learn from the people all around you. When Alexis de Tocqueville visited early America from France, he was struck that there was No country in the civilized world where they were less occupied with philosophy than the United States. But there was likewise no country where the principles of the Declaration were more deeply ingrained or more fiercely defended than those same United States.
Yeah, this is what I've been saying about trying to get a low level story. Like it doesn't need to be an academic exercise. In fact, that's almost like the wrong approach. What it needs to be is a ground level swell where people feel it and they understand the pull of these ideas. And it's the water they swim in, it's the air they breathe, it's in their blood and their bones. This is the story of America. That's what we need to get back to. We need to get back to a cultural conversation that is grounded in the Declaration of Independence. And we need to find ways to articulate this at the cultural level rather than the academic level, because the academic level is where you're going to be full of people who want to infinitely dissect and to go back and forth and write papers and do research grants. And that's fine. All of that's fine as long as the ethos lives within the American people. And that's the project, right? I tend to analysis. I tend towards the academic, so I'm always going to be pulled in that direction. But this is where the actual juice is. Mr. Brass, my buddy, fellow deist with the two, destiny equals our rights come from our feelings. Yeah. I mean, unironically, yeah. If you are an anti-realist and a subjectivist, and you are an emotivist, let's say, then what is a human right other than a policy preference that you think is good? That's it. That is a policy preference.
That is the sense in which I knew the principles of the Declaration in my childhood. That is the only sense in which those principles can sustain our country. And that is the sense in which I will speak to you about those principles today. I believe now, let me change this. I believe now, as I did then, that the Declaration of 1776 provides us with the principles to guide us as citizens of our republic. Even in this time of questioning and criticism of our founding, we should not forget that the Declaration established the principles that produced, despite all of our imperfections, our miscues, and our tragic mistakes. It gave us the freest, wealthiest, and most powerful nation in the history of the world. It provided the moral principles by which Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, and Martin Luther King would criticize the institutions of slavery and segregation.
This is what I was trying to explain to Pisco. All the major moral advances in our society, abolition, ending segregation, ending Jim Crow, what did Martin Luther King, what did Abraham Lincoln, what did these men appeal to when they were making a moral argument? They appealed to the values in the Declaration of Independence. This is the promise unfulfilled. And by the way, it will never be fully fulfilled, because if you're moving towards the good, you never get all the way there, because people are flawed and fallible. We'll be perpetually trying to live up to these ideals and never getting there, but we get closer. We get closer. We learn more about what it means to live in the best way that humans can. That's how you move towards truth, right? Yes, Tripingo, like physics. Like, we learn more about physics, but that doesn't mean we'll ever know everything there is to know about physics. We learn more about math. That doesn't mean we know everything there is to know about math. We've learned more about how to live as a society, but we have not reached the pinnacle yet. And this is different than progressing beyond these values. This is the humility to realize that we are going to be perpetually moving towards these values, but there is nothing beyond these values. That's what it means to have a objective moral framework, that there are objective morals that you need to live up to, but the fact that you'll never get there, that you're on a quest and the quest will never end in perfection, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It means that there's a nobility in the attempt, and there's a nobility in constantly moving closer to the good.
The Declaration, in fact, along with the Gospels, the Declaration is, in fact, along with the Gospels, one of the greatest anti-slavery documents in the history of Western civilization. It did not establish a form of government. That was the work of the Constitution that followed, but it stated the purpose of government. The
purpose of government is to secure natural rights. Don't have to be a genius to know that's what he's going to say. And if you're a natural law enthusiast or a natural law enjoyer, you probably saw that coming a mile away.
Declaration made it clear in clear prose that the purpose of government is to protect our God-given unalienable rights, rights that all individuals equally possess. As Abraham Lincoln declared in 1858 in the midst of his great debates with Stephen Douglas, quote, "Drop every paltry, insignificant thought for any man's success. It is nothing. I am nothing. Judge Douglas is nothing. But do not destroy that immortal emblem of humanity, the Declaration of American Independence." The ideas of the Declaration.
Great quote. Great. I quoted Lincoln Douglas during the debate with Pisco, but I didn't have that quote locked and loaded. That's a great quote. That's a great quote. I'm gonna have to memorize that one.
Are so powerful that our nation could not coexist with the contradiction created by the great evil of slavery. Those principles were so powerful that hundreds of thousands of Americans fought and died in the Civil War to make men free. Those ideas have been so powerful that they convinced our nation to finally end segregation. They continue to be so powerful today that they have inspired people throughout the world to throw off the shackles of their own oppressors. And it all began with our founders declaring in 1776 in the Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We should also not forget the important sentence that follows, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of a government, the measure of the justice of a government, is the extent to which they secure your natural, God-given rights. Clear as day in the Declaration of Independence. Living in Stug's walls temporarily with the 5. Thank you, buddy. It's a philosophy debate until there is action. It requires good works, and that the motive of those works is known to be love of country and freedom. It does. It absolutely does, Stugs. And it also requires that we full-throatedly endorse these ideas without shame or hesitation, like that you say proudly, I love my country. I love America. I'm proud of who we are and what we are. I'm proud of the progress we've made. I'm proud of our values, and I want them to live up with them. And I will not tolerate you besmirching them. When somebody says, like, America's an evil colonial nation, like, tell them to fuck themselves. You could do it nicer than that. You can have a great philosophical debate, and if you watch this channel, you probably are well equipped with the tools to attack such a position. But we have to actually have a voice in this. We have to be the type of people who are unabashedly pro-America, unabashedly pro our values, unabashedly out there saying, no, this is who we are, and I will not let you pervert it or corrupt it. I will not let you wear my values like a skin suit while you masquerade and promote progressing beyond them and talking about a entirely new set of values that has nothing to do with ours. I am going to be out there full-throatedly. This is what's necessary. He said it perfectly at the beginning, where he said he lived in a place where even his father, who he said was not a literate man, would espouse these values to him, and that people knew in their bones that these things were true, despite all the evidence in their lives that people around them were trying to take these rights from them. This is a truly important point, right? This is what we need to be doing.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted. The principle of consent follows from the principle of equality. We, the people, can never legitimately consent to the violation of our God-given equality. However, when I encounter
we cannot consent to a violation of our God-given equality. We cannot consent to a violation of our God-given equality. Did Justice Thomas just drop a new argument against affirmative action / DEI? That sort of thing? We cannot consent to a violation of our equality. I'm gonna have to play with that a little bit. That's a new argument.
Declaration of Independence anew today, I am most struck by the final sentence. It can be easy to forget, 250 years later, the courage it took for those 56 men to sign the Declaration. Arguably, those men committed treason against the king, risking death at the hands of an empire far mightier than the newborn United.
Lucky, I need to talk about this. I would argue, Lucky says, I would argue that progressivism is the idea that we move closer to that perfect union step by step, understanding that we never get there. It allowed voting without property rights, ended slavery. No, it didn't. It didn't. It did none of those things. It did none of those things, Lucky. It did none of those things. Progressivism, and has to be really clear in the way that we talk about this and the way that we define this. Progressivism in America has its roots in Dewey and Wilson, and what it specifically means is that we're going to move beyond the concept of natural rights, which are intrinsically, because they're framed as God-given, negative rights, and we're going to turn them into positive rights, right? So instead of your right to life being God-given, now your right to life means the government needs to feed you because you have a right to live, not a right to life. And the government should make sure that you stay alive. So the government has to feed you, but that means the government needs a tax base. That means the government needs to do all sorts of other things to ensure that it can feed you, right? Your right to liberty is your right to self-determination as a human, your right to choose your destiny, to pursue happiness, not your right to, have specific material goods, to go to a university and have people pay for it. Like, what happened is that the progressives reframed negative rights. These are things that the government shall not infringe into positive rights. These are things the government shall provide. But when the government provides the right, it's no longer God-given, unalienable, and pre-existing. When the government gives you bread to keep you alive, that's not the right to life in the Declaration. That's a right to welfare, which is a symptom of a government which is now in the positive right-giving territory. The government gives you this right. You don't have a right to bread on a desert island, but you have a right to your life. You don't have a right to live on a desert island. You might die. You might starve, but you have a right to your life. These are different concepts. And the progressives were so successful in this rebranding effort that many people today make the mistake, Lucky, that you're making, and they think that all these good things you're talking about were the results of the progressives, but they weren't. They weren't. And what the progressives did is they rebranded the terms and they made them into this ground that we are on now, where I talk to someone like Connor, and he doesn't understand that when he endorses Burkeanism today, he's endorsing a progressive status quo. That's the problem that I had with Connor, is that he's saying we, as Republicans and conservatives, need to stop bad ideas, but we never roll them back. And it's like, bro, the progressives already won. They already rebranded the American dream. They already rebranded the American ideals in their own image of progressive nonsense. We went from negative rights to positive rights, from God-given rights to the government gives you rights. And you're defending it on the ground of conservatism. And it's not American. This is the issue. And I think I'm really psyched for this conversation with Connor. I got some ammo.
They thus concluded with the memorable final sentence, and I quote, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." I will say it again. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Recently, I came across a definition of courage that is attributed to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. In essence, the signers of the Declaration were saying that they were willing to die for the principles they were asserting, the supreme act of courage.
I actually hadn't looked at this part of the Declaration before. I've read it, obviously, but not deeply analyzed it. And I know we haven't gone over it in chat much. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Oof. We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to each other to advance these values, these goals, these ideals. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator by certain unalienable rights, and that governments are instituted amongst men to secure these rights. That's what we're fighting for, and we pledge to each other that we will see it through. Whew. Goosebumps.
Principles were more important than their fear. Nothing in the Declaration of Independence, I now realize, matters without that final sentence. Without that sentence, the rest of the Declaration is but mere words on parchment paper. Nice words, but nonetheless, just words. What changed the world was not the words, but the commitment and spirit of the people who were willing to labor, sacrifice, and even give their lives, what Lincoln at Gettysburg called the last full measure of devotion for the Declaration's principles. It is that devotion, it is that devotion to which we owe our rich inheritance. It was that devotion that sustained the founding fathers and the Continental Army as they fought and won the Revolutionary War, braved the winter at Valley Forge, crossed the Delaware, and defeated an army many times their number and firepower, to win their freedom. It was that devotion that Nathan Hale expressed when, before being executed by the British, he reportedly said, "I only regret that I have but one life to give for this country." It was that devotion that Patrick Henry invoked when he stood before the Virginia Convention and asked, "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but for me, give me liberty or give me death." That devotion has driven the great achievements and heroism of Americans in the...
A few comments on this. First of all, there's been a bunch of you in chat. I know Gelatinous Rube comes to mind because I just read his donation, but he wasn't the only one. Other people were talking about the need for works. Justice Thomas is talking about the need for courage, that it is difficult to stand up for these principles. It is difficult to do these things. I know I struggle with this because I understand that even in speaking publicly, I'm a successful professional. Like in terms of like my own money and my own fortune in my career, I take a disproportionate risk by doing live streaming, and it doesn't give me financial rewards in the way that would make sense. It's a bad, in terms of selfishness, it's a bad idea for me to do live streaming. But you need to have courage. You need to be willing to stand up for these ideas. You need to be willing to take a risk and make a sacrifice. You need to be able to stand for something. And, who am I to talk about these ideals if I'm not willing to take any risk for them? If I'm not willing to take any risk for them at all, right? Courage is a big, important thing. This is something that, back in his heyday, Jordan Peterson talked a lot about, which was that he saw things were wrong and he decided that he could not be silent. And so many other people would come up to him and say privately, "Thank God someone's talking about this. Thank God someone's pointing out the mistakes before it's too late." But they didn't feel comfortable doing it. And part of what we need is the ideas, but a big part of what we need is courage. You need the courage to stand up for what you believe in, and you need the courage to say it openly and honestly and not be ashamed and not be browbeaten. And I bring this up in part because, and I'm not going to put any of these comments up on screen because they're idiotic and they're going to annoy me, but somebody got in chat and started attacking Justice Thomas, as I predicted would happen, because these ideas are poison to the left. Absolute poison. Because if you understand these ideas and you believe them, you instantly realize that the entire program of the left is an attempt to convince you to trade your liberty for security. That's what it is. To trade your natural rights for human rights, to trade your God-given rights for government-given rights, to become beholden to the government instead of being a free man. That's what the entire program of the left is. That's why the progressives had to erode this idea. They had to discredit natural law. They had to discredit natural rights and the values of the Declaration of Independence, because if those values stand, their ideas are immediately rejected. Immediately rejected. What do you mean that the government is going to be in charge of me? I don't need your help. I don't want your help. I don't want you to tax everybody and then give it back to us in the form of bribes. I'm uninterested. This is not what I want you to do. Governments are here to secure our natural rights, not to invent human rights and further them. It's a joke. It's a sad joke. And the fact that he's saying this so clearly is going to draw waves of criticism. He's going to be lambasted in the way he always is. And we need to see that for what it is. And when people come in and say nonsense about him, whatever, go your way, friendo. Go your way. I can't convince everybody. I'm not going to waste my time arguing with idiots. But if you don't see the truth in these American values, I question what you're fighting for. Like, what is the historic case that you're making that's better than this one, with a better American pedigree, with a better sense of what it means to be American and what it means to actually make moral progress? The joke being that progressives are actually regressive because there is no progress beyond natural law. There is only progress towards natural law.
250 years since. Think of the frontiersmen who settled the West. Think of the families who built their little towns on the prairies. Think of the women who raised their children to love God and country and sent them off to fight wars. Think of the soldiers on the battlefields of the Civil War who sang, "As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free." Think of the innovators and laborers and engineers who, Tocqueville observed, were so infused with the patriotism that they felt every triumph for their country as a triumph in their personal lives. Think of how the devotion carried us from Independence Hall to Flanders Field and to the beaches of Normandy. Think of the memorable scene in The Band of Brothers when the American soldiers arrived at a concentration camp, saw the suffering, emaciated, desperate prisoners, unlocked the gates, and gave them food and blankets and warm embraces. The soldiers looked around and knew in their hearts that this is why we fight. Think of the passengers of Flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania on 9/11, or the young men and women whom we send in harm's way.
I don't know how young my audience skews. I imagine enough of you are old enough to understand that reference. But if you're not, or if it was not on your radar screen for whatever reason, during 9/11, there were multiple planes and many of them hit their targets and caused catastrophic damage. But one plane crashed, and it didn't crash hitting a high value target. It just crashed. And the reason it crashed is that brave men on the plane overpowered the terrorists. Now, the terrorists were armed and they weren't, but they overpowered them. And during the course of the scrap, the terrorists crashed the flight, is the best explanation that I've heard, though I'm not deep in the weeds on this. But and I know some people here might know more than me, so if I get anything wrong, please correct me. But the thing about that story that always stood out to me is that it's not like you could stop the terrorists from crashing the plane, right? Because even if you overpowered them, they could still crash the plane before you could do anything about that. But by fighting, by risking your life, by risking a painful death by knife wound or box cutter or whatever it was, you could save the lives of your countrymen. So that plane crashed and everyone died, but they died heroes. So it's a remarkable story.
Even as we sit here today, think of my grandparents who heroically, quietly, without fanfare, sat my brother and me down at the kitchen table in August of 1955 and committed the rest of their lives to us so that we could have a chance. They told us, "We don't have no education. We don't have no education and no chance, but you boys are going to have a chance. But we're going to devote the rest of our lives to you boys." It was their devotion, their love, their dedication to raising us right that has made the difference, not the words, though the words expressed as best they could what they intended to do. Their devotion is what.
Yeah, it's not the words are good, but there's a duty. There's a duty to the ideal. There's a moral obligation. And all these stories are about people living up to that obligation. That one's getting me because I'm a parent. That one's getting me.
Mattered. Similarly, it is the devotion expressed in the final sentence of the Declaration, the willingness to do anything for our principles that has throughout American history been most indispensable. It is that devotion that we are missing today and that we must find in our hearts if this nation is to endure. I arrived in Washington, D.C. 47 years ago. It's hard to believe. I arrived as a staffer for Senator Jack Danforth of Missouri in 1979, telling myself that the job on Capitol Hill would be a short stop on my way home to Savannah, Georgia. I then joined the executive branch during the Reagan administration, served in 2 federal agencies for nearly a decade, served as a judge on the Federal Court of Appeals, and have for the past 34 years served on the Supreme Court. Since the day I arrived in Washington,
A lifetime of public service. A lifetime of public service. Here's the thing that gets me, and I know some of our like bleeding friends are gonna talk about like he accepted a camper. Let's assume he accepted a camper and he shouldn't have. I don't know whether or not he actually broke any ethical rule. I actually think there are no enforceable ethical rules for the Supreme Court in terms of that. But let's assume he did it and he shouldn't have. Right? Okay. Do you know that he makes less as a Supreme Court justice? He makes less than the average lawyer I know and work with. The average lawyer in New York City makes more than federal court judges. In New York City today, if you graduate from like a top 10 law school, you get paid more as a first year out of law school. You're useless. You don't know anything. You get paid more out of first year in law school than a federal court judge. Somebody like Justice Thomas, if he wanted to leave public service, if he wanted to go into the private sector, he would command a salary in, I think it would start at $10-15 million a year. Minimum. So it's a lifetime of government service. It's a lifetime of not earning what he could have earned so that he could get what he could live out the ideals that he wanted to live. And yet still subject to these attacks.
to traditional morality, to national defense, to free enterprise, to religious piety, or to the original meaning of the Constitution. These people can be just as high-minded as the men who signed the Declaration. They can mouth the words of the Declaration and parrot its principles. They can write essays and talk at conferences about the Declaration with the best of them. All too often, however, this was but lip service, camouflaged by grand theories in the tall grass of big words and eloquent phrases. What seemed to be lacking, however, was that devotion. People gain positions of authority, and you learn who they really are. To paraphrase something I recently read, combat strips us down to our essentials. Once in the spotlight, in that combat, many people fall prey to the lures that are set up to turn them away from their previously untested principles. They become petrified by criticisms, so fearful of negative attention that they find ways to avoid doing the right thing. Or they fall prey to the enchanting siren songs of flattery and become so bewitched by praise that they will desperately seek to conform accordingly. They are enticed by access to things that were previously unavailable to them. They get so swept up in the euphoria of acclamation and acceptance that they put aside their convictions. They water down their message, negotiate against themselves, vote against their principles, and hide in the tall grass. They recast themselves as institutionalists, pragmatists, or thoughtful moderates, all as a way of justifying their failures to themselves, their consciences, and their country. It didn't.
Holy shit. Holy shit. He just called out the whole game. He just called out the whole game. People, and you've seen this in the debate sphere, I'm sure. You've seen this in my debates with, the people I've been fighting with, I'm sure. People will find a way to try to dress themselves up in virtue. They'll try to find a way, like when I was debating Pisco on this, where he was trying desperately to say that no, he's representing the true American ideal, because the American ideal is just do whatever the Constitution says, and that's it. But when pushed on it, he had to admit that there is a principle beyond that doing violence to the Constitution to a certain extent would be wrong, and why. But he doesn't want to dwell in that. He doesn't want to think about that, because it would require him to re-examine his views. It would require him to re-examine his views. If you dress yourself up, and this is, again, I think this is food for thought for the Connor conversation, in moderation. And I get the lure. I, was always kind of like a center-left Democrat, and then I, when I left the left, positioned myself as a centrist. And there's a lure in that, because saying that you're a moderate makes you feel like you must be reasonable because you're not on the extreme. But what Justice Thomas is saying is that what you actually need to do is understand what is good. What is good? What is noble and good about America? What is our guiding principle, our North Star, the Declaration, natural law? And then you preserve that. And if the whole country's doing that, that makes you a centrist. But if the whole country is paying lip service to that while building false consensus on top of it, you're not a centrist, and you can't position yourself as one. And what he's saying here is that you have a moral obligation to pursue these values vigorously, and you shouldn't worry about where that positions you. You shouldn't worry about whether or not that puts you in the center or the left or the right. What you should worry about is whether you are honestly and vigorously pursuing these ends with devotion, with a full heart. That's what you should worry about.
Not take me long in Washington to stop wondering why the Supreme Court took 60 years to overrule Plessy versus Ferguson, the 1896 decision that endorsed government-enforced racial segregation and validated the Jim Crow South that I grew up in. It could not possibly have taken my court 60 years to know that Plessy was a hideous wrong and that racial discrimination was grossly incompatible with our colorblind Constitution. The justices must have known it all along. The right thing to do, as Justice Harlan spelled out in his lone dissent, was obvious, as it so often is. Perhaps what stood in the way was cowardice. The justices may have been afraid of the societal consequences They may have
Plessy v. Ferguson is the case that said separate but equal was constitutional, which later got overturned by Brown v. Board of Education. And what Thomas is saying here is he's saying, like, the 8 justices who voted for that, they must have known they were lying. They must have known they were lying, but they did it anyway. That's his theory. And what's his explanation? Moral cowardice. Maybe they were afraid of kicking off the Civil War. Like, you know, there's explanations, but whatever the explanation you give, it's hard to imagine that they thought that separate but equal fit within our constitutional values.
been afraid of coming under political fire. They may have been afraid of losing their social standing. They may have been afraid of bad press. They could have been concerned that if they began to enforce a colorblind constitution, they would have to address interracial marriage next. But in any case, for 60 disgraceful years, they made American children like me grow up in a racial caste system because it was easier to do nothing than to do the right thing. When Americans look to Washington and wonder why it is so often disappoints, it is not because there are too few people who know what is right. It is not because we lack the intellect or the capacity or the talent. It is instead because there are too few people who are willing to do what it takes to do the right thing, to sacrifice the popularity, flattery, comfort, and security that are the purchase price for principle. It is because
that's hitting me right in the golden handcuffs, boys. That's hitting me right in the golden handcuffs. Fuck.
Too few of us reflect on and reflect the courage and commitment of that final sentence of the Declaration. And so many seem to have forgotten how much others have sacrificed so that this nation could exist and endure. I will state this more poignantly. Do any of us have what it took for our young soldiers to storm Normandy Beach, to fight at Guadalcanal, to later fight at Chosin Reservoir? If we can't say that we have the courage required of these young soldiers in battle to defend our founding principles, then how do we preserve these principles and this republic? Until we have a devotion that matches the courage of those who made this country possible, I seriously doubt any amount of study or development of insights about our Constitution will make much difference. There's a world of difference between what it takes to score academic points and what it takes to protect and...
All right. Okay. I just need to say this because we're going to go endlessly around this on chat. And by the way, John, good to see you, buddy. See you later. We're not going to have an investigation into Justice Thomas and whatever alleged ethical violations you're concerned about, because he didn't violate any ethical obligation. There is no binding obligation on the Supreme Court not to accept gifts from friends. There just isn't. Now, if you think that there was a, honest services wire fraud or some kind of crime where he accepted a bribe in exchange for a ruling, then yeah, they could do that, but there's no evidence of that. No one has suggested there's evidence of that. So, what you're saying ultimately is that you think he shouldn't have done something that he did, but there's no ethical rule that he violated, right? Like, you have to actually have a rule that he violated for you to investigate it. If you're just saying, like, let's investigate it, like, for what? That's the issue here. There's no rule that says that he can't, have a friend give him an RV. Just like there's no rule, by the way, that said that when Justice Sotomayor didn't recuse herself from a case when her publisher was in the case, and she made millions off of her book deal. And her publisher was in the case, but she didn't recuse herself. Why? Because the Supreme Court doesn't have a binding code of ethics that would require them to do one thing or the other. And here's why they don't have a binding code of ethics: because they're the Supreme Court. They are the one who are in charge of the judiciary. So there's no one above them to enforce the code of ethics, and you can't make them subservient to another branch. So it's, ultimately the whole thing is a non-starter. John, thanks for dropping by, man. 5 gifted subs. You guys have been so generous tonight. Really appreciate you all. And I hope the chat appreciates the sheer number of emotes and gifts that have come out today. People are getting all kinds of benefits hanging out in the stream. So thank you so much, my friend. And yeah, I'm delighted to cover this. This is literally my love language. I'm more than I'm delighted to cover it. I'm delighted that he had the courage to say it, because and even in chat, you'll see here, by coming out and doing this, he's going to be the subject of attack pieces for the next couple months. People are going to renew all the propaganda about what a terrible human being he is. And just listen to the man speak. Does he seem like a terrible human being to you? Honestly, he's going to be subject to endless hit pieces now, because he's exposing the progressive grift. And they're going to fight back, sure, but I have no interest in taking that particularly seriously.
Defend the Constitution as we are sworn to do. I have faced this struggle myself. About 43 years ago, in the early spring of 1983, I was the lowest point in my life. I had just buried both of my grandparents, the man and woman who raised me, and the 2 greatest people that I have ever known. I was broke. I was living in and nearly evicted from a cockroach-infested apartment. I could not pay my credit card bills on time. I would soon sell my car to pay my son's tuition. I was being constantly attacked by the media and Congress because, as chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, I did not bow to the then prevailing orthodoxy on race. At that point, I asked myself a simple question: what are the principles worth? What are your principles worth to you? My answer then was the same I would give today. They are worth life itself. What are those principles? They are the same principles in the Declaration. They were bequeathed to me by my grandparents and reinforced by my nuns and my faith. In God's eyes, we are equal. We are all equally created in the image and likeness of God. We are all endowed with the natural rights to life, liberty, and happiness. Our rights and our dignity are inherent. They do not come from others, and they do not come from the government. And our government derives its legitimacy and its authority from our consent. We do not derive our rights from our government.
Ooh, hold on. Need a replay of that.
From the government. And our government derives its legitimacy and its authority from our consent. We do not derive our rights from our government.
The government gets its legitimacy and authority from us, but we do not get our rights from our government. This is the essential understanding. If you understood almost nothing else about natural law, but you understood that, I think that would probably be enough. Maybe this is where the conversations have to start. If you understand that your rights do not come from the government, then it is clear that the government's role is just not to infringe on them, right? And it's clear that the rights we're talking about are not positive rights for the government to hand you things, to give you things, to bribe you. It's clear what we're talking about just from that alone. Our rights do not come from the government. This is the core understanding.
The primacy of our rights in relation to our government is crucial in reconciling the immortal words of the Declaration with our Constitution and our history. None of our rights come from the government. All of the government's authority comes from our consent. And the structure and limited role of government is to assure that it does not exceed the authority to which we have consented or intrude on our natural rights. The Constitution is the means of government. It is the declaration that announces the ends of government. The Constitution achieves this purpose by protecting our natural rights and our liberties from concentrated power and excessive democracy. Our Constitution creates a separation of powers and federalism, truly for the first time in modern history, to prevent the government from becoming so strong that it threatens our natural rights. Federalist number 10 proposed the idea that the great threat to our rights come from the majority faction. Human history teaches us, alas,
This is the critical point.
that numerical majorities frequently seek to control government and use the state to violate rights of the minority. Because man is fallen, and the desire for power was, as James Madison described it, sown in the nature of man, government had to be limited. For as Madison also said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But alas, men are not angels. The slaveholders used the power of government to deny the fundamental rights, natural rights of the slaves. The segregationists used the state to oppress the freed men and women, including my ancestors. As we meet today, it is unclear whether these principles will endure. At the beginning of the 20th century, a new set of first principles of government was introduced into the American mainstream.
I'm sure this is clear because he said it perfectly. I'm not sure what I could add to that, but the reason that a limited government is necessary is that once you give the government power, it will inevitably attract the power hungry. And this is why government almost never recedes. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. So the need to enshrine a limited government, which we have not had for 100 years, but we had at the founding, the need for a limited government is to protect us from ourselves, from the power hungry amongst us, from those who think they know better and will use the power of the government to enact their whims, from people trading their liberty for security. A limited government is supposed structurally to prevent the majority from becoming tyrannical. And unfortunately, we live in an era where we're well beyond that point in terms of limiting government to its proper sphere.
The proponents of this new set of first principles, most prominent among them, the 28th president of our country, Woodrow Wilson, called it progressivism. Since Wilson's presidency, progressivism.
Hold on, I want to rewind that because I want to get the definition he used. He's on the Wilson train now.
At the beginning of the 20th century, a new set of first principles of government was introduced into the American mainstream. The proponents of this new set of first principles, most prominent among them, the 28th president of our country, Woodrow Wilson, called it progressivism. Since Wilson's presidency, progressivism has made many inroads into our system of government and our way of life. It has coexisted uneasily with the principles of the Declaration. Because it is opposed to those principles, it is not possible for the two to coexist forever.
Yeah, perfect. Progressivism is opposed to the principles in the Declaration. They will not coexist forever.
Progressivism was not native to America. Wilson and the progressives candidly admitted that they took it from Otto von Bismarck's Germany, whose state-centric society they admired. Progressives like Wilson argued that America needed to leave behind the principles of the founding and catch up with the more advanced and sophisticated system of relatively unimpeded state power, nearly perfected. He acknowledged that it was a foreign science, speaking very little of the language of English or American principle, which offers none but what are, to our minds, alien ideas. He thus described America, still stuck with its original system of government, as, quote, slow to see the superiority of the European system.
Ooh.
Progressivism was.
Woodrow Wilson described America as slow to see the wisdom of the European system. All righty.
The first mainstream American political movement, with the possible exception of the pro-slavery reactionaries on the eve of the Civil War, to openly oppose the principles of the Declaration. Progressives strove to undo the Declaration's commitment to equality and natural rights, both of which they denied were self-evident. To Wilson, the unalienable rights of the individual were, quote, a lot of nonsense. Wilson redefined.
Wait. Wilson said the unalienable rights are a lot of nonsense. That's wow. It's so funny. As I'm searching for this online, I'm already seeing the hit pieces on Clarence Thomas pop up. Like they're already permeating. They're all over online now. That because he said what he said. I mean, okay, I'm gonna have to find the quote later, but I'll take his word for it. Whew.
Find liberty not as a natural right attendant antecedent to the government, but as, quote, the right of those who are governed to adjust government to their own needs and interests. In other words, liberty no longer preceded the government as a gift from God, but was to be enjoyed at the grace of the government. The government, as Wilson reconceived it, would be, quote, beneficent and indispensable. Progressives such as John Dewey attacked the framers for believing that their ideas were immutable truth, good for all times and places, when instead they were, according to him, historically conditioned and relevant only in their own time. Now Dewey.
See, this is what I mean. I talk about Wilson, I talk about Dewey all the time. These men were openly opposed to the values of the Declaration. But what happened is they won a series of political victories. And today, the values of Dewey and the values of Wilson are presumed to be the status quo by a lot of people, right? And this is the problem. Like there's a false understanding that just because the thing is that it ought be. And when you hear the quotes he's using, these were men who were fundamentally opposed to the value system in the Declaration. Fundamentally opposed. But they wouldn't admit that today. Pisco wouldn't admit it when I debated him on this topic. He eventually kind of did, but it took some real badgering on my part. But at the time, they were very clear about what they were doing. They were very clear about what they're doing. They're just hoping that history has washed away the evidence of their intent.
And the progressives argued those ideas are to be displaced. Progressivism seeks to replace the basic premises of the Declaration of Independence, and hence our form of government. It holds that our rights and our dignities come not from God, but from government. It requires of the people a subservience and weakness incompatible with a constitution premised on the transcendent origin of our rights. You will not be surprised to learn that the progressives had a great deal of contempt for us, the American people. Before he entered politics, Wilson would describe the American people as, quote, selfish, ignorant, timid, stubborn, and foolish. He lamented that we do too much by vote and too little by expert rule. He proposed that the people be ruled by administrators who use them as tools. He once again aspired to be like Germany, where the people, he said admiringly, were docile and acquiescent. The century.
Imagine that. Imagine a president who said we should be ruled by experts, that the American people should be more docile, that we do too much by vote, that we should be ruled by this bureaucratic task of expertise, who admired Germany right in the 1920s. Some history might be around the corner. Unbelievable. And those are the ideas that have permeated and become the foundational beliefs of the modern left, who then try to take the moral high ground.
The history of progressivism did not go well. The European system that Wilson and the progressives scolded Americans for not adopting, which he called nearly perfect, led to the governments that caused the most awful century that the world has ever seen. Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, and Mao, all were intertwined with the rise of progressivism, and all were opposed to the natural rights on which our Declaration are based. Many progressives expressed admiration for each of them shortly before their governments killed tens of millions of people. It was a terrible mistake to adopt progressivism's rejection of the Declaration's vision of universal, unalienable natural rights. Wilson's claim that natural rights must give way to historical progress could justify the greatest mistake in our history. In Plessy versus Ferguson, my court upheld Louisiana's system of racial segregation because, quote, separate but equal, it observed, was reasonable in light of the established usages, customs, and traditions of the people, and with a view to the promotion of their comfort and the preservation of the public peace and good order. It comes as no surprise that the progressives embraced eugenics. Progressives believed that Darwinian science, the idea of ever-advancing progress written into biology itself, had proven the inherent superiority and inferiority of the races. It was only
Yeah, that is a fun fact. Woodrow Wilson was super racist, super racist. So amongst the other values he rejected, one of them was definitely equality. Living in Stoke's walls temporarily with the two, quote, we should be cucks like Germany, end quote. Woodrow Wilson. Wise words. Wise words. And yet, Not enough to discredit the progressive movement, apparently. Apparently that's not enough.
A small step for Wilson to resegregate the federal workforce. It was only another step for the government to launch sterilization programs on those deemed by the experts of the day to be unfit to reproduce, upheld by my court in Buck v. Bell in an opinion written by no less a figure than Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. We can argue over whether you believe in immutable, absolute natural rights or the Wilsonian idea of ever-progressing history. Indeed, your school of civic leadership was created to host just such arguments. But let me ask you to consider the consequences. European thinkers have long criticized the—
Holy shit. I didn't know this. So I was I was using AI to follow along with what Justice Thomas was saying, because I had never delved into this bit of American history. But holy crap, this is a wild one. So Buck v. Bell, again, I'm just reading off of AI, so if I can make a mistake, please forgive me. This is not content that I had previously known about, is the infamous U.S. Supreme Court in which the court upheld the constitutionality of government-forced sterilization of individuals deemed, quote, feeble-minded or, quote, unfit under eugenics laws. In an 8-1 decision, the court ruled that Virginia's 1924 Sterilization Act did not violate the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, and the state could sterilize Terry Buck and others like her without her consent to prevent the inheritance of supposed mental deficiencies and protect the public welfare. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or to let them starve for their own imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. Ellipses, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." And then, helpfully, AI points out the connection to the Progressive Era and Woodrow Wilson. This ruling came down during the tail end of the Progressive Era, when many reformers across parties embraced eugenics as scientific social engineering to improve society by controlling reproduction. Supporters included figures like Theodore Roosevelt in his later years and Woodrow Wilson, who, as New Jersey governor in 1911 through 1913, signed a eugenics sterilization law in 1911 that created a board of examiners to identify and sterilize defective people in state institutions. He was sympathetic to eugenicist ideas rooted in his progressive, Darwinian-influenced worldview. Progressive thought often prioritized expert-driven government intervention over strict individual rights, echoing Wilson's earlier critiques of the Declaration of Independence inalienable rights as outdated nonsense. Eugenics fit this by letting the state manage human stock for the collective good, much like regulating trusts or the economy. That's the guy. That's the guy. The guy who pioneered the progressive movement that the modern left uses to claim moral superiority. That's the guy. The guy who thought that it would be a good idea to have boards of experts determine who to sterilize in order to advance eugenics. Now, why is that morally acceptable in his view? Because he has progressed beyond the values of the Declaration of Independence. Because if all people are made in God's image, if all people are created equal, if all people are invested with natural rights, then of course the government cannot do this. It's morally abhorrent. But if you progress beyond those values, well, now, who's to say eugenics isn't for the common good? Because if they give you rights, they can take them away. Thanks, Jefferson, for the 2 and the perfect timing. Perfect timing there. Stuggs pointed out, also for $2. Thanks, buddy. Also, Adam Smith, Man of Systems quote. I got to check that out. Hold on. Let me look it up. Man, I don't know that one. And then while I'm looking that up, thank you, Stuggs. I appreciate it. Living in Stuggs' walls, I should say. Kay comes in. Interesting question, statement. But the leftist lens views the government and all institutions as apparatuses that create a dependence, and thus the government takes on the responsibility to protect and take on people's rights. And yeah, that's how it starts, right? You accept a government that is not here to secure natural rights, but is instead to secure your welfare or to provide for you rather than to secure your rights for you. And over time, you become dependent, and that dependency creates more dependence, and then the government expands and expands and expands and expands with no end in sight. With no end in sight. The Adam Smith quote, "The man of system is apt to be very wise in his own conceit, and is often so enamored with the supposed beauty of his ideal plan of government that he cannot suffer the smallest deviation from any part of it. He goes on to establish it completely and in all of its parts, without any regard either to the great interests or to the strong prejudice which may oppose it. He seems to imagine that he can arrange the different members of great society with as much ease as the hand arranges the different pieces upon a chessboard. He does not consider that the pieces upon the chessboard have no other principle of motion besides that which the hand impresses upon them, but that in a great chessboard of human society, every single piece has a principal motion of its own, altogether different from that which the legislature might choose to impress upon it." Yeah, great quote. Great quote, Stuggs. And the thing about that quote is it plays directly into the Thomas Sowell conception. He actually references a lot of the unconstrained vision. And that's what the unconstrained vision is. It views humans as pieces on a chessboard to be moved around. Hey, Ubercross, what's going on, man? Yeah, Thomas is like, this is unbelievable. This is like one of my favorite things that's ever happened. This speech is like, I'm going to have like a Jordan Peterson tears moment.
America for remaining trapped in a Lockean world with its weak, decentralized government and strong individual rights. They say our 18th century declaration has prevented us from progressing to higher forms of government. But we were fortunate not to trade our Lockean bonds for the supposedly enlightened world of Hegel, Marx, and their followers.
Shots fired, Chipingro. Hegel, Marx and their followers. Shots fired, Chipingro.
Fascism, which after all was National Socialism, triggered wars in Europe and Asia that killed tens of millions. The socialism of the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China proceeded to kill more tens of millions of their own people. This is what happens when natural rights give way to the higher good of notions of history, progress, or, as Thomas Sowell has written, the visions of the anointed.
Hey, the mind meld is complete. I just said that this was a Thomas Sowell lead up, and here we are on Thomas Sowell, Visions of the Anointed, the unconstrained vision at work.
None of this, of course, was an improvement on the principles of the Declaration. Tocqueville's Democracy in America is largely about how America owed its superiority over Europe to its conscious decision to reject central planning and administrative rule, root and branch. Progressivism, in other words, is retrogressive. As Calvin Coolidge.
Oh shit, is he about to drop my... This is the Calvin Coolidge. He's going to drop the Calvin Coolidge quote. He said progressivism is retrogressive. And then he brought Calvin Coolidge. He's going to drop the Calvin Coolidge quote I've been using. For sure. 100%. The mind meld. I'm locked in.
Said on the 150th anniversary of the Declaration, and I quote, "If all men are created equal,
that is final.
That is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights,
that is final.
That is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the government, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which they can proceed historically is not forward, but backward, toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individuals, no rule of the people. When Abraham Lincoln addressed the assembly,
That quote goes so hard. That quote goes so hard. Oh,
crowd at Gettysburg, they had gathered to memorialize the past, but Lincoln's address urged them to not do so with complacency. Instead, Lincoln said they should look to the past as inspiration to take them to greater heights in the future. And I quote, "It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we were highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth." As we are gathered to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, it may be tempting to do so as if we are passive spectators. It may be tempting to enjoy our tea and crumpets, treat the Declaration like a shiny object or a keepsake, and listen to the sound of our own voices. We could get into debates over whose conception of the founding is better, over how we are so much better than our founders were, over what we would do differently. We could be careful to not do anything that exposes us to criticism, costs us friends, or hurts our career prospects.
I'm pausing this because this has to be clipped. Let's clip this because this is the call to action. This is like the mission statement of the channel right now, right? We could be passive. We could view the Declaration like a shiny bauble. We could sit here having our tea and crumpets, talking in fine words about what a noble idea this was and that we've moved beyond it. Or we could do something. We could do something. This is literally the call to action for the reasonable right. This is the call to action for the channel. This is what the channel is for.
But in my view, we must find in ourselves that same level of courage that the signers of the Declaration had, so that we can do for our future what they did for theirs. Each of you will have opportunities to be courageous every day. Whether your calling in life is as a day laborer, a stay-at-home mom, a small business owner, an educator, an office worker, a judge, or some other endeavor. It may mean speaking up in class tomorrow when someone around you expects you to live by lies. It may mean confronting today's fashionable bigotries, such as anti-Semitism. It may mean standing up for your religion when it is mocked and disparaged by a professor. It may mean not budging on your principles when it will entail losing friends or being ostracized. It may mean running for your school board when you see that they are teaching your children to hate your values and our country.
This is it, right? This is it. You cannot be passive. You cannot be passive. For a long time, classic liberals have been too passive. The belief has been that the idea was so good that it was self-reinforcing. we cannot be so passive. We cannot be so meek. We cannot be so timid. We have to go out and we have to actually do something. Run for school board, talk about these ideas, fight these fights. And like, I know that like my own story is not the be all end all of this, right? Like there are people who risk way more than me and are risking way more than me and are doing more than me. But I just ask yourself, like, given that I grew up left and I have most of my friends are some variation, my childhood friends are some variation of progressive left, and my family tends to lean left, and most of my colleagues tend to lean left. Do you think I've made my life easier by talking about the evils of affirmative action, the evils of anti-white bigotry, the evils of creating systems that institutionalize racism because it's the good kind of racism? Do you think this has made me a lot of friends? I can promise you it sure as fuck hasn't. I can promise you it hasn't. But there needs to be action and there needs to be courage. There needs to be a populace that understands these values and is willing to stand up for them. And he said something earlier about a student afraid to speak up in class. And that's very real. There's a lot of people who feel the way that you feel about these issues, but they know that if they stand up in class, they're going to be on the firing line, that their progressive colleagues and classmates are going to mercilessly attack them for their beliefs, are going to belittle them, are going to call them racists, bigots, whatever the word of the day is, that's what you're going to be called. And it makes people afraid. And we cannot be afraid. We're at a crossroads in our country where a lot of people are claiming that liberalism has failed. And of course, what they really mean is classic liberalism failed, but classic liberalism didn't fail. The progressives drowned out the classic liberals, and we caught the stray. We caught the stray. And we have to be brave enough to stand up and just say, no, we're not doing this anymore. I don't need to pretend that I'm going to go along with you on this ride that you're trying to take me on. I know what my values are, and they are unalienable. They are God-given. And because of that, they're not up to you or me. And I don't care what your argument is about why I should abandon them. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your argument is because it's not up to me. It's not up to me. We need to be that courageous.
It may mean turning down a job offer that requires you to make moral or ethical compromises. One thing I do know to be true. It will mean waking up every day with the resolve to withstand unfair criticism and attacks. These are the choices that will confront you, and you must decide whether to respond with timidity or with courage, as the signers of the Declaration did. It will, of course, not be easy, never is. But if, like me, you need a greater source of strength than yourselves, you will need to rely on your faith to guide and to sustain you through it all. You will disappoint people you thought were friends and endure personal attacks, as well as attacks on those you care about. But if you stand, you will find that courage, like cowardice, can be habit-forming, and it will become a part of your life and a part of who you are. And I may dare say it is liberating. You will also be a living example for others to emulate. So by all means, celebrate the Declaration of Independence. It is the most important act of American history, the foundation of our Constitution. And as Lincoln said, the sheet anchor of our republic. But I implore you to celebrate it by standing up for it, by defending it, and by recommitting yourselves to living up to its ideals. Channel the courage of the men who faced down a king and signed it, or a president who led the nation in a civil war, rather than permit this house to be divided by the great contradiction of slavery. Take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, let us mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Thank you, and may God continue to bless our country.
Oh my God, did you guys catch that? Do you guys catch the book ending he just did? He started talking about the Declaration and, paragraphs 1 and 2, which we talk about all the time because that's where the philosophical principles are laid out. But then he said to him the most important part was actually the last sentence. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And that was the most important part, because that was the pledge that showed their courage, that they were willing to stand up for these principles and put their lives on the line for what they believed in. Whew. Whew. The book ending there, like just bringing it home. That's incredible. Truly incredible. What a remarkable speech. What a remarkable speech. Yeah, Topeka, I do think this is great. I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you enjoy this content, that makes me happy because I enjoy making this content. So this is, I hope this is replicable. But wow, I don't know that I have many speeches like this to share. I haven't heard a speech like this. This is unbelievable. This is an unbelievable show of courage and commitment by Justice Thomas. And I want you guys to remember this, because people are going to be attacking him viciously in the next couple of weeks. People are going to be like, say this was inappropriate, that he was doing that justice shouldn't be weighing in on politics. Did he say anything about any elections? Did he say anything about any particular policy? Or did he lay out a historic case for the values he believes in? Hoping that people like you, that people like me would take the time to listen, and not just read incendiary headlines, not just read the words of lunatics who are doubtlessly going to spend their time defaming and attacking this man at this point. Like, of course, that's what they're going to do. Of course, that's what they're going to do now. And I think I've already seen. Yeah, I think here it is. This is ABC News's headline. Thomas said Washington has been overrun by elected and appointed officials who lack commitment to righteous cause, to traditional morality, to national defense, to free enterprise, to religious piety, or to the original meaning of the Constitution. Does that seem like a fair description of what the man just said? And this is the classic media spin, right? Because they're not a lie. He did say these things, but if you thought that was the takeaway from the speech, I think you were listening to a different speech. Hmm.
We're so grateful.
Sorry to go on so long.
No, we are so grateful.
Sorry to go on so long. Jesus. Supreme Court Justice just drops that heat and he apologizes.
You came to our university to deliver this fantastic address. It's meaningful and important. We are honored by your presence. And so we brought you a present to remember the Longhorn family as well. This is your jersey and your invitation to come back to our campus every day. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Hold on, watch this. Your name's on the back. You got to wear it sometime.
He's a Georgia boy, so giving him a Texas jersey is pretty funny.
Terrible from responsibility.
That was remarkable. Truly remarkable. Truly remarkable speech. Remarkable speech. Remarkable speech. I do want to watch the Q&A, though, because I'm curious what questions they ask him.
Think about and to reflect on. Hope it wasn't too.
Audio on this seems weird to me. Maybe it's because I'm wearing headphones. I'm only getting it like on one ear. I'm not sure if that's fixable, but if it's unbearable, let me know and I'll do something else. But I'll try to suffer through getting one ear headphones.
Too painful for you as a Nebraska fan to be given that jersey there at the end. So if anybody, but you're in friendly.
Well, I offered it up.
Okay. So, for the final part of our
Yeah, it was the same crew that mic'd me up at Word War. They set this up.
Program today, a number of our wonderful students here at the University of Texas, undergraduates and graduates, have submitted a number of questions that Justice Thomas has graciously agreed to address. So, I'll read the name of the student, the school they're in, and then the question. And some of these are going to be softballs, and others are going to be for the final exam. So, all right. So, anyway. All right, the first one comes from Austin.
Look how much fun he's having. He's like waving and he's really enjoying himself.
Boyles of our law school. What is your favorite opinion you've ever written?
I have no idea. I don't keep, honestly, I don't want to be glib, but one of the things I decided early on is never to keep score, never to keep trophies. I don't count the number of opinions. I don't count the number of years I'm on the court or anything like that. I think you just do your job. You get up every day, you do it, and you leave it there. I think that the most dangerous opinions are the ones that people seem to have the least interest in. And just remember, Plessy was not considered an important opinion. You won't find any contemporaneous law review articles or anything on it. And look at the damage that it's done. And any judge can tell you that any number of unimportant opinions sit there in our reports like a loaded gun. And somebody finds it and they use it on something really important. So I don't know how many opinions I've written, but if I were forced to choose opinions, the category I would choose would be the ones that nobody's interested in, like Ford Motor Credit or something like that. The time value of money. You can't do much damage with that.
Our next question comes from Ella Full with the School of Nursing here at UT. This will be asking you to elaborate on some themes that you already addressed in your speech there. What experiences in your early life most shaped your judicial philosophy, and how do they continue to influence your decisions today?
I've thought about this because people like to think that it's some high-minded thing. It's actually working with my grandfather. If you plow, everything mattered. He would say, send me on the tractor with water and fuel, and to go back to a remote field. And he said, that road better be straight, or he'd make you do it over. And so you get everything that, and you can apply the exact same things to opinions. And I think the other thing is to start by knowing that you don't have all the answers. He never really said that he had all the answers. There are so many people who have answers, judges have answers.
This is what I was talking about with Stelios the other day. The idea that if you are like a natural law enjoyer, you're going to be somebody who has deep certainty about things that a lot of people don't have certainty about. Like you have deep certainty about a metaphysical issue, which a lot of people have no certainty about metaphysical issues, but then a deep humility on the normative side, on the side of knowing what you don't know, on trying to kind of work through the problem and actually figure out what you think, and doing the work to come to your own conclusions and trust that you're capable of engaging in that process. So this is a tension, right? Where he's talking about the need to do your best, the need to be thorough, the need to be precise, the need to be humble, but also we just heard him talk for an hour about the certainty with which he holds these values. So it's humility as to yourself, but certainty as to what's above you, which is wisdom as opposed to hubris.
Local. I was one of the guys working on old buses. He said, "Oh, your rear pinion seal is leaking." I don't know what the heck is a rear pinion seal, but just the whole idea of dealing with that, of thinking through that. He's so careful that this is important. But I think that way about opinion. If it's worth it to our country, it's worth doing it right. Every little thing. You skip steps, you cause problems. You make a mistake. You've got to, we owe it to these people, to this country, to get these things right. So, I think my grandfather, because he said a job worth doing is worth doing right, and he would hold your feet to the fire. If you are around poor people, if you say there are little things that if you don't tell the truth about it, it costs you everything. You don't close up the chicken coop, you don't have chickens. You don't close the gate. Your cow gets out. The cow's dead. Your hogs get out. Every little thing can be the end of you for that year. You don't plant corn right. You don't fertilize the corn. You don't plow it right. You destroy your food for the winter. And that's the way I try to do the job of the people, the way I would do it for my grandfather. Honestly, thoroughly, and according to the proper processes.
Our next question comes from Aidan Bowman.
I'm positive that's not the answer that student was expecting. I think they were looking for some kind of academic answer, and he gave a much more kind of grassroots blue collar answer.
With our School of Civic Leadership, how do you respond to critics who argue that originalism may limit the court's ability to address modern issues that the framers could not have anticipated, such as digital privacy or emerging technologies?
Oh,
I don't think it does. I haven't given that much thought to Pingro. I'm typically an Enlightenment era guy. Deism's a very Enlightenment era philosophy, so tough for me to stray from my Enlightenment roots.
I think there's actually a pretty good opinion by the chief. I didn't agree with him completely, but he applies the Fourth Amendment to cell phones. And we had a precedent that basically allowed policemen, when they arrested bookies, to search them and things for their own safety, and they might find a note or something in their pocket. And the note may have information on it. And the question was whether or not that would violate the Fourth Amendment. And of course, our precedent said no. And the issue became whether when you did the exact same thing to someone today and you found the cell phone, is the cell phone like the note or like your file cabinet at home? And so you look at it that way, and he concluded, and I tended to agree with him, it's more like the file cabinet at home. And so the Fourth Amendment would prevent the police officer without a warrant from searching that.
So we've talked about this on the channel sometimes, but this is kind of an originalist thing. There's two types of originalist cases. I'm going very generally here. There's the easy ones. The easy ones are the case where there's, so let's say three. There's the first case where the words of the Constitution are totally clear and require no interpretation. The president must, to run for president, you must be at least 35 years old. There's no ambiguity there. So there's no need for interpretation. Just do what the words say. Then there's the case where the words are capacious. What is a cruel and unusual punishment? But the question is the same question today that the people who wrote the words were faced with at the time. What is cruel and unusual punishment? Well, is the death penalty cruel and unusual punishment? Well, it can't be. How do we know? Because at the time of the death penalty, at the time that the Eighth Amendment was passed into the Constitution and ratified, the death penalty was the most common punishment for most crimes. So whatever they meant by cruel and unusual punishment, it couldn't rule out the death penalty altogether. Now, the harder category of cases is the ones that Justice Thomas is describing now, where you have a historic analog, but it doesn't actually apply one-to-one with the things that happen today. So the question is, does the Fourth Amendment to what extent does the Fourth Amendment protect a cell phone? And the question is, well, does it protect it to the extent that it protects a letter or the extent to which it protects a filing cabinet? Because if you're arrested and you have a letter on you, the police can read the letter incident to your arrest. But if they're arresting you in your home and they don't have a search warrant, they can't search your filing cabinet. Is the cell phone more like a filing cabinet or a letter? And I tend to agree with the justice that it's more like a filing cabinet. And those are the harder originalist cases. Oh, old school, a new member. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for the support. Very glad to have you here. Enjoy the emotes, the piss cry, the OTJ, the golden cuffs, all the wonderful emotes and privileges that come with membership. Thank you for joining, my friend. Appreciate you and the support. And Gelatinous Rube, friend of the stream with the 5, reminds me of JT complaining about Satanists. The founders couldn't imagine cringe anti-religious idiots. Bro, they knew all about Thomas Paine. Well, Gelatinous, shots fired. Shots fired. You know I'm a deist, right? Thomas Paine is kind of my homeboy. I certainly enjoy some Thomas Paine. I don't know if I can go down the road of criticizing Thomas Paine with you too much, since he's a pretty influential guy for me. But, and I don't think deism qualifies in the way that you're talking about. I think deism is more or less compatible culturally with Christianity, where Satanism would not be. But, that's a topic for another day.
I don't think we've had much of a problem in applying it. I think there's some things around on the horizon that we're going to have some challenges with, like AI. I don't even know what that is. I'm going to have to learn. I think there are some things about privacy that should have been addressed with legislation that we have not, within the intellectual property issues, the First Amendment issues, some of the Fourth Amendment issues, some of the sort of unfair copying issues, defamation issues, et cetera, that we have not addressed. And I don't know if the court's in a proper place to do it, and I don't know if the law's properly drafted to allow us to do it. But I do not buy this notion that the Constitution cannot address modern problems. That's the bottom line. I think we have shown a capacity to do it, and it may not be able to address them all, but I think the issues that we are concerned about, like Fourth Amendment issues, some of the First Amendment, I think we're in a good position to do that. But I also think that there's some things that can be addressed statutorily that haven't been addressed. Thanks.
Our next question comes from Ethan Thompson, who is a dual degree student in our Moody College of Communication and our College of Liberal Arts. And Ethan asked this: has there ever been a ruling you gave that you personally disagreed with, but you disregarded your personal disagreement because you believed it was required or upheld by the Constitution?
I think if you ask most judges, we operate within the sphere of our authority. And as federal judges, of course, that's Article 3. And we do not draft the laws. We may not like them. We may not, as a policy matter, and if we were legislators, we might not even vote for them. but we take what is given and we apply that. It doesn't mean you do it with glee. I don't think any judge does hard work. It's really, you know, look at my pictures when I first arrived at the court and look what it's done to me. There isn't a single judge I know who does hard things because they get joy out of it. They do hard things because they signed up to do hard things. And they may not agree with it, and it may be difficult. They may think it's not a great law, but their job as Article 3 judges is to enforce the law, to interpret it and to apply it to that particular case. When I first became a judge, Judge Larry Silverman, who's unfortunately passed away, said, ask yourself before each case, what is my role in this case as a judge? Notice how that limits you, not as a person, not as a Catholic, not as a policymaker, not as a husband, as a judge.
That's a key tenet of originalism, right? You're not there to enact your worldview or shape society. You're there to be a judge. You're playing a role within the constitutional system, and you have to be true to that role.
And that is early on that required more discipline. We had the Haitian refugee cases, and that's when they were sending the Haitians, diverting them, first President Bush and then President Clinton, to Guantanamo Bay, which was a military base. Most people think it's some kind of a camp now, but it was a military base then. And they were diverting there for certain constitutional reasons, not bringing them to our country. I, in my heart, bled for the Haitians. It broke my heart. And I remember speaking with I was brand new. I spoke with Chief Justice Rehnquist, and he said, you have to do your job. And he was really good about it. I said, this is really hard, but it was that moment where you learn this is what the limit is on my authority. This is my role, and I have to accept it. But that was early on a very, very difficult case. I don't think anyone could look at people in those circumstances and as a human being not feel badly about it. But our job is to, as a clerk said about one of my colleagues, that he should man up. Our job is to man up and do our jobs.
I want to ask.
It's an interesting story because you wonder, under living constitutionalism, when would a judge ever be required to do something they didn't want to do? One of the hallmarks of originalism is that it imposes restraints. And, that's the story about being restrained by your role and by the philosophy, by your jurisprudential philosophy, is important because it shows that you are, in fact, under restraints.
To that clerk.
Oh, I'm not. No,
okay, all right, okay. I'd say it's off the record, but there's 1,000 people.
Oh, no, nothing off the record.
We'll talk afterwards. All right.
No, you lose control of it as soon as you...
Yeah, okay. All right. Shane David Willett from the School of Civic Leadership asked this. If you could recenter the study of constitutional law, what aspect of American constitutionalism do you think is both foundational yet strangely under-discussed?
Oh, I think the ratification, the founding, I think what our framers really meant by the Declaration. I think that, when I was in law school, we didn't even read the Constitution when I took constitutional law. We did not certainly read the founding. We did not read.
That's crazy. Why not?
Pauline Mayer has this wonderful book on ratification. I mean, it is one of the things that I have found being in this job, and what we owe to our fellow citizens is to educate ourselves about history. I just think we owe it. It's like the football players have off season. They have conditioning and all those things. I think we have to do the exact same thing. We have to be prepared. We have to read about Reconstruction, on and on and on. It isn't just about looking at the words. It's about looking at every.
They crafted the Constitution to be amended, but not the Declaration, demonstrates they knew some things can and should change over time, but others could not be because they don't and can't. Well put. Well put. If your rights are inalienable and God-given, humans can't improve upon that. But they can improve upon the system of government that secures those rights. Well put. Well put, my friend. Very well put.
Everything that was around it. I remember when we were working on the McDonald, separate writing in the McDonald gun case. And people were saying things like the framers never thought of broadly about the right to bear arms, and especially with respect to the newly freed men. Well, you can go read Eric Foner, and you don't have to agree with him politically, but you read his book on Reconstruction. You can read others on Reconstruction. They were concerned when they drafted the 14th Amendment, what was happening to the freedmen in the South after Reconstruction, and it was awful. You had the Knights of Camellia, you had the Ku Klux Klan, and sure, they thought they had a right to protect themselves. But you had this oft-repeated mantra that, of course, that this right did not apply. And you can go and dig through the history, and there it is. These people have a right to defend themselves. They have a natural right to self-defense over and over and over. And that's why the McDonald, but I think it's the history. You owe it to people to do the off-season work, to do the conditioning, to read, not just opinions, everything, and to be prepared for these hard cases. And I think people underestimate the amount of work many judges do to be prepared for the hard issues. It's not just the cases. They teach to expand themselves, to look at things a different way. You talk about, and the ones I know are so committed to doing that. So if it were up for me, I would say the context of these provisions, the history around these provisions, the people who were involved as much as you possibly can, their biographies, et cetera, from different perspectives, until you have a sense of what you're working with and not just the words on a piece of paper.
Yeah, he's advocating that judges have to be deeply learned in American history. Deeply learned in American history and widely read and widely studied in order to be able to handle these very difficult constitutional questions when they arise.
Our next question comes from Ryan Karkowski, who is a dual degree student with our Macomb School of Business and our College of Liberal Arts. He says, and this is more on a personal angle, you've spoken often about the warmth and friendship among the Supreme Court justices despite deep ideological divides. What is the most important factor in maintaining that culture in such a time of polarization?
Oh, I don't know. I would go back. I mean, when I said a lot of that, it was when I first went to the court, and that was a different court.
Ooh, that was a different court. That's a little bit of shots fired. He didn't exactly criticize the current court, but when he said like the warmth and camaraderie, that was a different court. That was a different court. Court today, maybe not as warm.
The court that was a World War II generation. There are people on that court like Sandra Day O'Connor, who I think gets way too little credit for what she did. These were people who they were more in that tradition of a civil society, et cetera, and who would listen to different points of views. I think this generation of kids they're in a different world. They're in a world in which I think Marcuse and the people who advocated intolerance 30, 40 years ago would be happy with this intolerant view that your enemy, that the people who disagree with you are your enemies. I think that questioner should ask themselves and the young people here, how do you do it? How do you deal with different opinions in this university? How do you deal with it in your dorm? How do you deal with it at the coffee shop? And when I went to college, you could debate endlessly. We called them rap session all night. And you'd go at it and you were friends and you loved, and you would pick it up years later and continue that debate. But you were buddies. That's the way, guys, that's what we did. It's like me ribbing the president over that 3 seconds you all stole from us in the championship game, Big 12 championship. And I'm not holding it. I mean,
Let's talk about revisionist history for a second.
Did you or did you not add 3 seconds?
We only needed 1 second.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Okay. All right. So,
But I think they do, seriously. I think
He's having a lot of fun. He's having a lot of fun today.
that young person should ask yourself while you're in college, how do you all deal with differences? Because I joined the court that dealt with differences as friends, as we respected each other. And I don't know how that civility, I don't know how you bring it back in the current environment with social media and name calling and people accusing each other of various things and animus. I don't know how you do that. And I fear that that's going to infect the institutions such as the court and judges, et cetera, in the future, because these are the young people who will be in these jobs.
Our next question is one that I know you've got some views and a track record on. We talked about this earlier today, so I'm especially excited to ask this one. It comes from Edwin Ling with our
Law Chad sides with Justice Thomas. Let it be known.
College of Natural Sciences. For those who don't or haven't attended an Ivy League for law school, but are interested in being a Supreme Court justice or clerk, what would their path look like? Is there any significance in having an Ivy Law degree on the Supreme Court? And do you see that trend shifting in the future?
Well, I think it's really what we have allowed is for certain law schools to dominate the court. Both the law clerks and the members of the court. 4 of us on the court now went to Yale Law School, 4 went to Harvard Law School. And last I checked, those were not the only 2 law schools in the nation. 1 went to Notre Dame. And I have said, I have been harping on this since the day I got there. This is wrong. That was also reflected in the law clerks, that many of the law clerks went to certain schools. Now, we have changed that. I think smart kids can be found virtually anywhere. I had one of my clerks recently, who's now a federal judge, went to Covenant College. I had never heard of Covenant College. And then she went on to University of Florida Law School. But I think, and as I said, starting here, I had clerks out of the University of Texas. I mean, these are wonderful, wonderful kids. They're smart. They're normal. They don't feel like there's a noblesse oblige. I've even had clerks who went to Texas A&M.
Oh, okay.
That's a bridge too far. No Texas A&M talk. Not at UT.
Now you have to be more broad-minded than that.
Yeah. No one's perfect. Okay.
But I don't think it makes any sense for us to be the preserve of the Ivy Leagues. I've been very consistent about that. I think that people talk about diversity on the court. You talk about a lack of diversity. One of the things we have been able to do, and that I feel good about, is when I first got the 11th Circuit, which is the eastern part of the South, Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. It was rare that you had law clerks from that circuit, and we were able to. There was one year, I think there were 10 or 11 clerks at the court from the 11th Circuit. We have clerks from the 5th Circuit. We're beginning to get kids from all over. And I think you're going to see that in the future feed in the judicial appointments. And I really respect the judges who have broken that mold and helped to break that mold, and who aren't enamored of these 1 or 2 schools that judges seem to be locked in with in the past.
So, next question comes from George Grayson Slover, who is another dual degree student at our law school and at our LBJ School of Public Affairs. And he asks, how do we dispel the fatalistic view that the judicial branch has become just as political as the other branches?
Ooh, great question. How do we dispel the fatalistic view that the judicial branch is just as political as the other branches?
Well, I mean, that's, I'm really, those get pretty old.
Yeah.
I think that we have reached a point where the people who comment on judging and on courts have become more like political commentators. When I arrived at the court, there were people who actually read the opinion and commented on the opinions and would explain as you go back to the 1950s, for example, or the 40s, and you read the New York Times on, say, Wickard and Filburn. It's beautifully written. It's concise and it's straightforward and it's actually correct. And it raised points for the future. Now it's like a drama. And I was kidding about the University of Nebraska game. Actually, I wasn't. But I want you to just put it in this context that you and I, if we're watching a football game, say you all are playing Alabama, and the referee makes a call that costs you the game, as a fan, what's your reaction to that referee?
Pretty mad.
Yeah, and you base it totally on the call he made because you wanted a particular outcome. Okay, now let's change it. Let's say that referee makes the exact same call, but it's against Alabama. What do you think of that referee?
Justice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how people view the Supreme Court. It's corrupt if they're ruling against them, and it's wonderful if it's ruling for them.
Exactly what is happening now to the judiciary. When they like an outcome, you're great. When they don't like an outcome, you're horrible. You're political. You're going out. And I don't think that's good for your country. That goes back to the point about civility. They're not commenting as people who are commenting on law. They're commenting almost as fans. It's all outcome determinative. Or the outcome determines the analysis. It backwashes into what they think of the judging. Now, I'm not going to make any comment about judges themselves. We may disagree about what certain judges are doing, but my point is it's not helpful that the commentary makes it seem that way or exacerbates that.
Our next question comes from Althea Honan with our College of Education, and she asks, given the rapid evolution of technology and societal norms, is there a specific case from earlier in your tenure where your perspective on the underlying legal doctrine has shifted since your opinion was issued?
Actually, if you go back last year, I was the only one on the court who was there for virtually all of the development of the internet.
Oh my God, he's been on the court for the whole development of the internet. Oh my God.
And I know that's sad, but I did not invent it. I don't want that set up. And it's interesting. I was there for the development of that, for the development of cell phones. We had car phones back then. And so what has happened, if you look at the early indecency cases that we had with Playboy and some of the others, and the cable cases, you'll see that the jurisprudence, having been there through all of that, you come out one way in the early cases, and you say that, well, the censorship violated the First Amendment because it wasn't nuanced. You could not censor it in sort of a targeted way. But then recently I wrote an opinion where I said the opposite of what we said then, because the technology is now so good that you can do that. Does that make you?
Yeah.
So the technology changed the analysis because you're dealing with something that is fundamentally different or categorically different from what we were dealing with in the early years.
All right.
They're applying the same law to different facts, so the analysis changes, even though the issue is would on some sense seem like it's the same.
Here's another kind of technical one from Aidan Ross with the law school. Tensions between originalism and textualism have been well discussed by legal scholars. In your jurisprudence, how do you square the text, the original public meaning of the Constitution, with common law and founding era sources that clearly indicate an outcome removed from the text?
I don't think I've run into that problem.
Shuts it down. He's like, yeah, it doesn't exist. Not a thing. The text and the original meaning, they don't diverge the way that you're suggesting.
And honestly, I don't know. I know it's a good question, but I don't understand what the roots of it is, because when you do originalism, you look at the tradition, you look at the context, you look at the history around it, and that part of that is common law. So I really don't know where that conflict is, and I can't tell you I read those articles. I'm really busy. I've not run into. I just don't know I don't know what they're talking about. I wish I did, but I don't. I've not had that problem.
Not what he's talking about, but he seems physically like he's in pretty good shape for an older guy. He doesn't seem, if you watch Sotomayor these days, she doesn't quite seem the same. He's maybe he's going to stick around for another president or two. We'll see.
Marlo Polma with our School of Civic Leadership asks, how much did Justice Scalia impact your judicial philosophy?
Ooh, I've never heard him answer this before. I'm very intrigued. They had a interesting dynamic at oral argument where Scalia talked and he didn't, but I haven't heard him talk about what their relationship was like behind the scenes. Very interesting.
Very little. I mean, he and I were quite different. And we were both surprised that we would wind up the same place. We rarely, if ever, discuss cases. He was out killing unarmed animals a lot. I could not get into that. Why would you walk into the woods where there are rattlesnakes and moccasins and stuff to kill something you can get at the supermarket? And we would have this discussion. He'd go out in the woods, But no, he and I were different. But we, again, I would say in the years that we were together, there may have been no more than a half dozen cases that we talked about before we went to conference. It's just we arrived at the same conclusions in different ways. If you want to see, I thought one of my favorite back and forth with him was in the anonymous speech case, McIntyre, because he said that the contemporaneous views about anonymous and pseudonymous speech being protected speech, there was not enough contemporaneously or in literature to show that it was protected. And so he used subsequent history. And we disagreed. I thought it was a wonderful back and forth, absolutely wonderful. But we rarely talked. He wasn't around as much, and he worked in the evenings. But I think he didn't have that great an influence. He's had an influence on the law. He probably was a bit of a more textualist than I was. He said that I was a bloodthirsty originalist and that he was not. I don't know what that means, but I like
a bloodthirsty originalist. He meant that Justice Thomas is much more willing to overturn. Justice Thomas is, we've been talking about incrementalism recently. Justice Thomas is much less of an incrementalist than Justice Scalia was in this sense. Justice Thomas's jurisprudence is that if something is constitutionally wrong, it ought be overturned. And Justice Scalia had a much more careful approach to overturning cases than Justice Thomas does. So Justice Thomas is the more bloodthirsty originalist between the two of them.
the sound of it. And then he said to me once, oh God, I miss that guy. He said, Clarence, I walked in the conference of Clarence, you're solipsistic. I said, Nino, I don't know what that means, but I like the way it sounds. Or he said, he would say funny things. He would, there was an opinion that he thought was a bit of a dog opinion. And he was talking to the chief about it. And I walked in, he said, oh, give it to Clarence. He has nothing to lose. But he was he didn't influence me on my jurisprudence as much as he was just a wonderful friend that I trusted to work with. We would disagree. He referred to one of my Fourth Amendment amendment opinions as what did he said? It was a liberty destroying cocktail. And so we were out to lunch with the clerks one day, and he was having trouble figuring out what to drink. And so I said, Nino, you should get you one of those liberty destroying cocktails. He immediately said, oh, that wasn't me, Clarence. That wasn't me. It was, and the law clerks are sitting there. There's one of these DNA is on it. His fingerprints are all over it. He dropped this ID on it. And he's claiming it's somebody else. A liberty destroying cocktail. I thought that was a great line. No, but I loved working with him. I loved working with that court. That court that was together 11 years is my favorite. It was a wonderful time. But as far as my jurisprudence, I take ownership of that and all the blame and everything else. No one else is responsible. It's me.
Our final question comes from Sergio Nunez. Also,
that was a really fun answer. Just a lot of, I don't know that it changes anything in terms legally, but it's just a lot of insight into his life and how he viewed his job, and him and Scalia cracking jokes and ribbing on each other. That's awesome. That's just fun to hear. That's just fun to hear.
With our College of Education, and this again is going to be touching on some of the themes that you touched on in your formal address. As public trust in government continues to decline across multiple institutions, including the courts, many Americans now see the loss of confidence as a hill the government must climb to restore credibility. Why do you think public trust has eroded? Which concerns do you think are legitimate? And how do you suggest that we as a people could rebuild confidence in government, including the judiciary?
Oh, I think by learning more about it, by understanding it, and by not being controlled by people who have an interest in constantly pounding away because they don't agree or they want something else. It's like they're throwing temper tantrums.
That was a gem. Hold on.
Institutions, including the courts. Many Americans now see the loss of confidence as a hill the government must climb to restore credibility. Why do you think public trust has eroded? Which concerns do you think are legitimate? And how do you suggest that we as a people could rebuild confidence in government, including the judiciary?
Oh, I think by learning more about it, by understanding it, and by not being controlled by people who have an interest in constantly pounding away because they don't agree or they want something else. It's like they're throwing temper tantrums. I think that
a few really great points there. One, if you are someone who, and I think if you follow me, you probably are, is more interested in steering the bulldozer correctly than in broad scale demolition, and is more interested in rebuilding than in demolition for demolition's sake, you need to know what you're talking about, right? You need to be informed on the issue, and you need to be read in. That's point one. And point two is you're going to encounter people who are cheering for demolition because they are hopeful that their ideology will be the one that rises from the ashes. These are people who should not be trusted, right? When you're talking to somebody and you get the impression that what they are trying to do is to burn it all down so that their preferred ideology will replace the American ideology, this should trigger an alarm bell in your head, right? This is the critique of progressivism, ultimately, is that they are attempting to replace rather than to refine. And I think that's a lesson well worth taking.
Unless people, and I meant what I said, I do not. It took to the speech even. It takes a lot of work for me because I want to say what I actually think. And I think if we don't stand up and take ownership of our country and take responsible for it, we are slowly letting others control how we think and what we think. I think the beauty of going to school is that you learn how to think for yourselves. You develop the discipline to think things through. And if you think it's losing confidence, then you get up and you participate. You don't sit on the sidelines. You think that the state is being run and inconsistent with how you feel, then you get up and you participate. You prepare yourself. If you think that the medical profession is not right, well, you become a doctor or be a medical person, and you deal with that. I think we need to take ownership of our country. It's our country. It is not on automatic pilot. People know more about how to program their cell phone than they know about their participating in their government. They read more. I don't know who reads all these notices when you have to update your stuff, but they probably do. I mean, the Constitution is that thing. You could sit down over a cup of coffee and read the entire thing. How many people have read it? How many people know why those provisions are there? I mean, I think each of us, this again, try to make the point, is government by consent. That means we take ownership. It's our consent. And it's our country. And the only way, I was asking a student at lunch today, and I'll repeat it. If you let someone use your car and you never check on it, whether they changed the oil, they had it serviced, you just let them take it to East Texas and use it, and you get it back, what condition do you think it would be in? It wouldn't like that. And that's what we're doing to our country. And if you want to think of people, how much they protect their cell phones. Why don't we protect our country that way? It's ours. And if you want it, to have trust, if correct what you think is wrong, then get up and do it. Learn more about it. I was at a
Preach, bro. Oh my God. Learn more about it. Get up and do it. It's our country. Yeah, this is what I've been saying. I think that people who have this classic liberal ideology have become so passive over time, so willing to just kind of sit there and confuse belief in a limited, restricted government with an inability to take a moral position on anything, right? And that's what modern liberalism has become, where it's inverted. We have a strong government that can assert itself everywhere, and people who are unwilling to take moral stances on, the things that they're interacting with, except for when they're backed by the crowd. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding. We should have less government and more moral character, less abstraction and intellectualism, and more root understanding of who we are and what we believe. And I think that a fault is ours in that classic liberals have just been so passive, and have let the ideology be mutated by people who don't want it and want to replace it with something else. It's time. It's past time. Beautifully put.
A group of high school students visited me some years ago, probably, 30 years ago. It's hard to say that. I'm hanging around a long time. But the 30 years ago, and the teacher in front of the students said, "How many members of the court are there?" Well, she had a brochure in her hand that had 9 members. I mean, how hard is it to count to 9? So I think it's our country. We should take ownership of it, learn more about it, participate. If you don't like the way it runs, you run. If you don't like the way something is done, you get in there and you do it the way you think it ought to be done. Or if you think that you want to check to see whether trust is declining, you go and do it yourself. Don't listen to the networks or somebody on social media. Go check for yourselves. So I think, again, I repeat what I said there. It's our country. It's governed by our consent. Let us act like that and take ownership of it.
Well, Your Honor, you have blessed us greatly here with your wisdom, your candor, your patriotism, and some of these closing exhortations. So everyone, please join me in one more big show of Texas gratitude. So, thank you. So.
Well done. Well, that was a lot of fun. This has been a delightful stream. Man, oh man, do I hope I can find content like this for you guys in the future, because this was I just had a great deal of fun doing this. This was great. This is everything that I am looking for when I'm streaming. What wonderful content.